Hi all. In this video we're going to start to look at rural geography. Now, a very brief topic outline. There's really only two main strands that we look at when we're talking about rural geography. We've got rural land degradation, and we're going to focus on this in semi-arid environments. And then you've got rural land use conflicts and their management, and we're going to be looking at this in the Lake District. Now, in today's video, we're going to be looking at rural land degradation in semi-arid areas. So first, where are the semi-arid areas in the world? Now, if you look at this map, you'll see any area that is shaded, and it doesn't matter which particular colour of shading we're talking about here. For our purposes, we're going to be classifying all of these areas as semi-arid. This shows you where these areas are spread around the globe. Now, what are the characteristics we look for when we're determining whether or not an area is semi-arid as opposed to perhaps arid or something else? Now, for an area to be classified as semi-arid, it needs to have a precipitation level of between 250 millimetres to 600 millimetres in any given year. And the reason is if it was less than 250, we would be talking about arid desert environments. And more than 600, you tend to be talking about savannas or things like that. The rainfall pattern in these regions tends to be extremely erratic, and a lot of the time when it does fall, it comes as torrential downpours, and the water goes more or less immediately to surface runoff, and the vast majority of it is lost. We've got very, very high rates of evapotranspiration. Any vegetation we have tends to be short, scrubby grasses and bushes and things like that, and the population that lives in these areas tends to work predominantly in agriculture. Now, what is it that's actually degrading the land in these areas? Now, we've got two major agents of degradation that we talk about. We've got water and we've got wind. Now, with water, we've got four kind of main subtypes of work that's being done. You've got rain splash, or sometimes called rain splash erosion. And this is the idea that as each individual raindrop hits the ground, it makes little tiny particles of the soil kind of puff up into the air, and they can then be dispersed and moved by this. Sheet erosion, that torrential rain I was talking about earlier that's going straight to surface runoff, that removes sheets, very thin layers of soil all at the same time across a potentially very, very large area. Rill erosion is when if you've got very, very small kind of cracks and whatnot along the ground, when it then rains, you'll have almost tiny streams running through these cracks, and you get enhanced degradation, enhanced erosion in those areas. And leaching is where you've got the rainwater, it is actually seeping into the ground a little bit, it's leaching all of the nutrients and goodness out of the top layer of the ground and into deeper areas. When we talk about wind, there's a lot of similarities here in terms of transportation back from the hydrosphere topic, but we're talking, right, one, you've got suspension, so if you've got very, very fine dust-like soil, which is common in a lot of regions in the world, it can be literally, picked up and suspended in the air and blown away. Siltation, which is a lot more common than suspension, it must be said, when these particles of soil are bounced along. And lastly, surface creep. And this is where if you've got a slope, if you're going downhill, gravity will just gradually drag little bits of soil downhill. And this is a very, very slow process, but it does happen on most slopes anywhere. So all of these things are happening to help degrade the soil, and this is going to lead to desertification. That's the kind of the main worry here. Now, when we're talking about desertification, what are other things that can add to desertification happening? We can have climatic variability. So if we've got lots and lots of wet years, people then go, great, this is fantastic for farming. And they then try to farm extensively. Now, because of that, because of how extensively they work the land, when it then becomes dry again, the land is very, very prone to being degraded. Deforestation, people in a lot of these areas, we tend to be talking about the developing world, and trees will be used for fuel, they'll be used for building materials, and then you lose the roots of those trees which help to bind the soil together. Overgrazing, the last two are together, and I'm aware that I'll take me away for a moment. The last two at the bottom are kind of on the same general theme. So overgrazing and then overcultivation, and my boys here as well, and overcultivation or poor farming practices. Overgrazing is where we've got too many animals in one place, and they strip away all the vegetation in this area. And that, again, it leads back to the same kind of problems that deforestation leads to. You lose the roots, and then the soil isn't bound together, so it can blow away more easily. Overcultivation, poor farming practices generally. Again, we're talking about monoculture, so planting the same thing in huge areas. That puts a lot of stress on the soil, and it makes the soil waste away. If you don't allow something that's referred to as fallow time, and that's giving the soil a chance to recover, that again, it puts a lot of pressure on that soil. And again, global population figures are rising. So because the global population is going up, that puts more pressure on getting more out of the land. So, what are the impacts of desertification? Why are we bothered about this? Now, as with everything, we split the impacts into economic, social, and environmental. Economic, environmental, and social on this slide. Economically, we're talking, we're reducing income, we're increasing the amounts of poverty in rural areas. This fuel wood that people depend on is being decreased as well. Environmentally, you're getting less land that's suitable for agriculture. The deserts are literally growing. Desertification does mean the growth of deserts. You're increasing the rates of water and wind erosion, and because you're increasing the stretch of the deserts, you tend to be reducing potential biodiversity as well. Socially, we've got forced migrations, refugees, social tensions, a loss of traditional skills, and rather pointedly death. People do die because of desertification and the loss of arable land or agriculturally suitable land around the world. Now, with this, we're going to spend the next kind of 8 or 9 minutes looking at 2 little case studies, and it's very kind of short case studies that talk about examples of this type of degradation. Now, the first one we think about is the Great Plains in the US. Now, with this, we're looking about an area that's in the rain shadow of the Rocky Mountains, so that has a big impact on the amount of rainfall that it gets. Since the 1930s, the land was extremely extensively farmed, and you had huge overcultivation in the 1930s particularly, and there was a total lack of fallow time given to anything. I do have a co-host today. A big lack of fallow time given to the recordings, given to the farms in these areas, so the soil quality suffered. You also started to see machinery used, and it was used excessively, and this had an impact on the quality of the soil as well. Now, what were the impacts of this? Now, realistically, we're just branching it into 2 kind of sections at this point. Environmentally, we've got a loss of topsoil. We've seen very, very bad dust storms, and this resulted in the soil being made infertile. Socially, economically, farms had to be abandoned. People had to move out of rural areas and move into some of the cities in these regions, and rates of rural poverty increased hugely. What was tried to be done about this, and this is where, pardon me, this is where one of your kind of exam style questions would come in, is that how has this rural land degradation been managed? So with this, we've tried a few different strategies, and these are just examples. There are more. Putting in place shelter belts. Now, shelter belts is literally where if you plant trees at right angles to the kind of the direction the prevailing wind comes in at, it stops the soil being blown away. And it's very, very effective at it. It's a very good solution. The problem with it is that, one, it's really expensive. Planting trees is not a cheap process, and the impact you don't feel until those trees are well established and kind of fully grown in, which can be 25, 30 plus years down the line. You can also have contour ploughing, which, if you think if you've got a hill, rather than ploughing straight up and down the side of the hill, you go around the hill and you try and stay at a set height, and then you move down again and you keep going. Now, this results in water being slowed, as in it can't just run straight off the hill down the kind of the furrows and stuff that you've just dug. But it is, again, it's time consuming, and it's quite difficult to do accurately. Again, if I hide me for a moment, the last one that we've got here is terracing, and it's this idea of cutting steps into a slope. Now, that creates flat farmland, which is good because it's easier to work on flat land, but you need to maintain these flattened fields, and again, it's expensive. It costs money to do that. How effective have these management strategies been? Now, the dust storms that occur in this region do still occur, but they're certainly less disruptive than they have been in the past. Rural depopulation is slowed, but again, it's still an issue. The water table. Now, water table is just the natural line under the ground at which water would sit at. So it's that natural kind of level that water exists at underground. It's decreasing. So because that's decreasing, that means the amount of water you have available for irrigating your crops, for instance, is declining. The land overall is less productive, and because of this, economic activity in the area has had to be diversified. You've had to have different methods of making money now. So we would say that overall this has been kind of somewhat effective. It's not been totally effective, but there have been some successes. Right, John, okay, thank you, buddy. Next, our second kind of mini case study for this, Burkina Faso. Now again, Burkina Faso, what is the situation there? We've got very, very low levels of unreliable rainfall. We've got, when it does fall, it's this kind of problem we talked about earlier, where it is extremely intense rain and it does only fall occasionally. Droughts occur in this region again and again and again. Because of all these factors and because of stresses you have, because of increases in population, you see a lot of overgrazing and overcropping happening. Because food is a bit of a scarce resource in this region, food's increasing in value, and that again encourages people to grow even more of it. Thank you. And there's also been civil unrest in the area. There's also been civil unrest in the area. All of these things lead to major problems. Now, what are the impacts in this area as well? Now, you'll notice that a lot of these impacts are very similar to the impacts we have in the Great Plains. So yeah, we're talking about loss in the soil, the water table being reduced. These are big environmental problems. Socially, economically, we see people migrating, rural depopulation, rural poverty is a major issue. We talk here about a loss of a traditional way of life. It's slightly different from the Great Plains in that the agriculture we have in the Great Plains is very much industrialized agriculture, so it's not a traditional way of life you're losing. These areas then have a reliance on international aid. We see malnutrition happen, we see famines occur as a cause of this, and obviously that can result in death. So it can be very, very serious. Now, what has been done in these areas? So first we could have, again, this is not a comprehensive list, and some of the stuff we talked about with the Great Plains is relevant here as well. But one example you can have is the creation of diguettes. Now, diguettes is where you fill gullies and areas like that with stones, and that reduces the rate of runoff and it reduces the impact of that runoff. So it stops water washing the soil away as effectively. If you put drought-resistant plants in place, you get specific trees, shrubs that can cope with very little water. So they can stabilise the soil in these regions, they can stabilise the sand dunes, and that stops these things blowing away. It stops it being as big a problem. Again, if I hide me for a moment, education. If you go into these areas, you've got farmers that don't necessarily know the most efficient and effective methods of farming in this area and the methods of farming that will ensure that they don't have huge issues down the line. So, we look at things like strip cropping, which is, again, it's kind of similar to the contour ploughing we were talking about earlier, where you only harvest sections of a field at a time. And the reason for doing that is that if you only harvest a section of a field, the stuff that you've left there can protect the gap, the break in the soil that you've just made from the wind and the rain. Fallowing, as we've talked about earlier, the notion that you do need to leave land alone for a while to allow the soil time to recover so that it can remain effective. Now last, how effective have these kind of strategies been? Again, we're talking about some of the small scale projects, and they certainly meet with success. Rates of desertification have slowed, so that is positive. However, desertification is still a major problem. So it's been somewhat effective. Right, I'm gonna say that's gonna be us now, guys. I'm sorry for the interruptions we've had in today's video. I'm sure you will forgive my boy for it. And I will catch up with you guys next time. You saying bye? No, he's being shy now when I'm finished. Right, until next time, guys, I will speak to you later. Bye.